9 attacks in 12 months. Germany has had a terrorist attack every 6 weeks.
Fundamentally, where you want to try and inflict damage on terrorist organizations, it has to be at the money supply.
Bank transfers, hala, crypto, mobile banking. If it can be used to transfer money, it is.
In Nordrhein-Westfalen ist eine mutmaßliche islamistische Terrorzelle aufgeflogen. Die Bundesanwaltschaft ließ heute 7 Männer aus Tadschikistan, Kirgisistan und Turkmenistan festnehmen. Sie gelten als Unterstützer der Terrororganisation Islamischer Staat.
The authorities hoped they'd made a major breakthrough against Islamist terror networks. The raids involved over 200 officers from Germany's national and regional security agencies. The suspects were then transported to Karlsruhe for questioning by federal prosecutors.
Today's arrests show that the threat from Islamist terror remains very high. Our focus continues to be on preparations for a terrorist attack, but above all, financing as well. Our goal was to drain funding for terrorist organizations early on. I'm very pleased by today's arrests.
But the case would above all illustrate one thing: how difficult it is to bring backers of terrorism to justice in Germany, and especially when it comes to financing. A point highlighted by then Interior Minister Nancy Faeser.
Germany makes it as complicated as possible to get convictions.
This woman used to live in Syria, together with her husband, a fighter with the Islamic State, or ISIS. She asked to remain anonymous and to be called Chloe, which is not her real name. She saw firsthand how easy it is for ISIS and other terrorist organizations to get funding, and what that money is used for.
They'll always find options. Completely preventing is impossible. In Germany, that is.
She says she spent 5 years with ISIS in Syria.
You knew what was going on and that you were heading into a war zone. Anyone who claims differently is lying.
Chloe says she had a difficult childhood and was put in a care home at the age of 15. She later converted to Islam. She then met her future husband, a Muslim. Everything was fine at first, she says, but his radicalization started shortly after they got married.
It was a month or 2 after the wedding. We were at a friend's place. The men were sitting together in a room watching Arab-language TV.
There was a news report about the armed struggle of ISIS in Syria.
My friend's ex-husband kind of gave him therapy. He said, "We have to go and help, and not just humanitarian help, but fighting too." And that was when he started making travel plans.
Plans that involved Chloe and her husband going to Syria. He wanted to join ISIS, the radical Islamist group that had evolved from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. In 2013, ISIS capitalized on the chaos of the civil war in neighboring Syria to expand its operations and territory. According to Chloe, she and her husband used their savings to pay for the journey to Syria and to get situated with IS. She says others got funding from other sources.
Some people took out loans or ordered stuff online, didn't pay, and then sold it. One guy used to work in a bank. He had a full-time job and a good credit rating, and he managed to somehow get another €50,000 loan and then took off with that.
Like many ISIS supporters from Germany, Chloe and her husband first got a flight to Turkey. Smugglers, she says, then helped them cross the border into Syria. A route commonly used by ISIS supporters, some of whom used funds from Germany's welfare system.
First, they'd empty their accounts. And if they were receiving benefits, they simply didn't deregister. If they were receiving benefits, they wouldn't go to the welfare office and say, "I'm going to join ISIS in Syria, so please stop my payments." They'd take their bank cards with them and withdraw cash at the first ATM, which was usually in Turkey.
Hans-Jakob Schindler advises governments and fintech companies on detecting funding for terrorism, even smaller amounts like at this workshop in Berlin. And it's precisely the less conspicuous sums that can add up to a crucial source of funding.
Micro-donation financing is actually a very old method. Today we call it crowdfunding. A lot of people donate small amounts to support some cause. There is no significant Islamist terrorist organization that does not use donations and crowdfunding to finance its operations. They use cryptocurrency as well as traditional channels. They take advantage of supposed humanitarian causes to raise funds and even extort humanitarian organizations in crisis regions. They all do it.
18 months after the raids and arrests in Germany. It's day 37 of the trial against the men who'd been taken to federal prosecutors in July 2023. The charges: forming a terrorist organization and planning attacks, plus providing financial support for a terrorist organization after allegedly collecting sizable amounts of money for ISIS members. One of the defendants is represented by court-appointed lawyers Serkan Alkan and Martin Heising, who have a history of defending radical Islamists.
According to the indictment, the money was wired from Germany to Turkey, and from there to Syria or elsewhere. We're challenging the claim that the money actually arrived in the camp. It's claimed that the money did get there, based on text messages saying so. But whether that's enough to establish the probable cause required for conviction, we disagree.
This is a major trial. The indictment alone stretches across more than 300 pages. It followed months of police investigations, also into the man represented by the two attorneys, who is known only as Syed S. due to German reporting restrictions. At this stage of the trial, the defendants faced a sentence of up to 10 years in jail. Not so long ago, various parts of Syria were left devastated by ISIS's campaign of terror. And it remains a politically fractured and unstable country. While ISIS was ostensibly defeated in 2019, experts say its underground networks remain all too active and warn that history may repeat itself. Beginning in 2013, ISIS overran large parts of northern Syria and vast areas of Iraq, and in 2014 declared its own state, a new caliphate. The group committed a range of mass murders, in some cases executing hostages on camera. The German authorities estimate that around 1,150 individuals from the country's pro-Islamist movement traveled to Syria or Iraq. It was at this point that Chloe and her husband arrived in Syria.
He was summoned the next morning to the training camp. He was gone for 2 months, and I was left alone, living in the home of his acquaintances and his wife.
At that camp, her husband geared up for combat and was even issued a gun.
They were all given gear, but a lot of them bought their own stuff because they wanted to have their own, or the gear provided was worn out. The prices for guns varied. You had those knockoff Kalashnikovs, which you can get cheap, starting at maybe $500 or $600.
In order to afford additional equipment, recruits also required funds from Germany, supplementing their wage from ISIS.
He was paid every month. Money for living expenses. They didn't call it a salary, just living expenses. You couldn't do much with it. Maybe to buy extra electricity, charge your phone, and buy food for the rest of the month.
How much?
$100 for the two of us.
Many fighters and their families turned to social media for fundraising. Telegram was especially popular. But how did the money then reach the war zones, which lacked banks and ATMs?
It was transferred via Western Union to Turkey. Then you had to know a Syrian who could wire it to the country or take it across the border.
Western Union is one of several transfer services that allow people to send or receive money anywhere in the world without a bank account, an option that terrorist groups happily exploit. But no transfer services were available in places like northeast Syria, so the money had to arrive via other means.
Major terrorist groups and their financiers face the problem. How do you get the money to its destination? You can use cash couriers, but for that you need an army of trustworthy people. You're giving them tens of thousands of dollars and hope they hand it over on the other side, and don't just disappear with it and say, "Great, thanks, and goodbye."
The solution? Hawala, a system that also exists in Germany, albeit largely without official authorization and most often illegal. It takes place behind closed doors, typically in call shops, jewelry stores, and travel agencies.
Hawala is in itself not a bad thing. It's the oldest form of banking in the Arab world. The idea was to transfer money without the risk of it being stolen by robbers or crusaders along the way. How do you move large sums? You have point A here in Germany and point B somewhere else. Two people who know and trust each other very well, often from the same extended family. You have money deposited here and paid out there. No actual net movement. The person in Germany calls their partner in the crisis region and says, please pay person X. Here are some personal specifics and a password. Amount Y. 100 euros from Germany wired to Y in that crisis region. All you need is a communication channel and absolute confidence that the person will settle that account.
Hawala operators, known as hawaladars, actually need permission from Germany's financial regulator. But since only a tiny fraction apply for authorization, most hawala transfers are illegal.
A hawaladar has zero motivation to keep records of their criminal activities, of course. They're not going to keep records of who gave them money or who received it in that crisis region. They'll delete or destroy everything once the transaction is complete, so as not to provide any evidence.
Authorities are usually unable to trace where hawala funds end up and how, which is why the system is used not only by families wanting to send money back home, but also by supporters and members of terrorist organizations. Martin Heising runs a law office in the small West German town of Wachtberg. He and his fellow attorney Serkan Alkan say they've spent 1,400 days in court for state security-related cases. Their latest trial, their client Said S., stands accused of having sent several thousand euros to his brother, who federal prosecutors say is a member of ISIS. The charge? Financial support of a terrorist organization. His lawyers dispute the accusation.
I wouldn't
deny that he transferred money to his brother, but the evidence suggests it was at most used to support charitable causes for people who had ties to ISIS but were in need. Orphans at the brother's Quran school in Turkey, for example, or women living in camps under horrible conditions.
Following the defeat of ISIS in 2019, families of fighters were placed in displaced persons camps. Al-Hol was the biggest camp, with over 70,000 detainees. About 24,000 people lived there at the beginning of 2026. Kurdish security forces had been in control of the region and the camp until Syrian government troops drove them out in January 2026 and closed the camp. Many experts see such camps as a risk factor, as places where radicalization can take root, flourish, and become resurgent. The camp remained under Kurdish control when we filmed. Co-administrator Jinan Hanan gave us a personal tour. We also visited a hawala office in the camp, where people received money from abroad.
My son is wiring me 200,000 Syrian pounds. It's been 3 months since our last food delivery.
200,000 Syrian pounds, at the time of filming equivalent to 13 euros. A former camp administrator explains the alternatives.
There are money transfer offices supervised by the security authorities. There's a limit on the amount you can receive, up to maybe $300. That's it. Hawala only permits small sums for daily needs, but larger amounts are smuggled into camps illegally.
Kurdish troops patrolled in and around the camp around the clock to prevent smuggling. But it wasn't just money being brought in and out in secret. We were shown a hole cut out of the perimeter fence, one of many attempts to smuggle out IS fighters.
Over the past 6 months, since the fall of Assad, things have become more dangerous. ISIS has become more active. It seems to be reorganizing, smuggling money, logistics, phones, and other communication devices. We're trying to stop it.
And while we were present, a patrol looked for 2 suspects a few hundred meters away. Eventually, they caught them. The 2 men were then taken for interrogation. We never found out whether they were civilians or ISIS members. Chaos ensued in the camp as the Syrian army advanced and Kurdish forces withdrew from the camp. Observers say there were a number of escape attempts, although there are no verified figures. During her time with IS, Chloe saw many women who were just as radical as the men, while playing a crucial role in fundraising.
I called them ISIS hooligans. They're like fangirls following a boy band. And they were often far worse than the men.
While the men were away fighting, those women were busy behind the scenes.
They're at home all day, recruiting other women online to help, for collecting donations, setting up communications channels, and obtaining SIM cards. When one Telegram channel gets shut down, they need a new number to open a new one. They're extremely motivated, and in my opinion, pretty dangerous.
What should social media platforms do to combat questionable fundraising?
Current law doesn't require them to do much proactively, unless there's a post saying, "I'm planning to kill Hans Schindler in Berlin at 4 p.m. tomorrow." Then the platform has to act. But apart from that very narrow window where someone's life is in danger, they don't have to do anything.
The EU's Digital Services Act says intermediaries have no general obligation to monitor the information they transmit or store to look for evidence of illegal activities.
The legal framework neneeds updating. These digital platforms must be required to cooperate, just like financial institutions. They'd have legal requirements to filter content according to set criteria. If they detect a fundraising campaign that is likely linked to terrorism financing, German investigators would like to know.
The Austrian city of Linz is home to a suspected radical Islamic fundraiser. Mustafa Ayesh is an Austrian national with Palestinian roots. He gained the attention of German investigators after allegedly glorifying terrorism on his Telegram channel Gaza Now and asking people to donate money to Hamas. Austrian police raided his apartment in March 2024, arresting him on suspicion of funding terrorism. Ayash posted a photo of the resulting damage to his door. He was immediately added to the sanctions lists of the British and American authorities, but not the EU's. He is suspected of having collected $4.5 million in donations, some of which allegedly ended up in Hamas bank accounts. with most of the money coming from small contributions. His Gaza Now platform used a QR code to direct donors and their funds to crypto wallets. What does Mustafa Ayash say about the allegations? We tried to talk to him with a concealed camera. But he wasn't home. Could a neighbor tell us more about him and his alleged activities? Hello, do you know Mustafa Ayash?
The Palestinian?
Yes.
He's most certainly in Turkey, the only place he's safe.
The sanctions and investigation didn't hamper his fundraising attempts or the posts supporting Hamas and its military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades. And new QR codes were posted. As for the man behind Gaza Now, we managed to call him in September 2025. He confirmed that he was the manager of the channel, but dismissed the allegations against him. His words paraphrased here. We do not promote any military groups. And we never collected funds for Hamas. Austrian prosecutors placed Mustafa Ayash on an international wanted list in August 2025 over suspicions of funding terrorism. The next month, he was arrested at Amsterdam airport and later extradited to Austria. February 2025, downtown Munich. Preparations are underway for the annual International Security Conference. Heads of state, top-ranking officials, diplomats, and experts from around the world will meet here. The No Money for Terror event was held on the sidelines. The man who helped uncover the story behind Mustafa Ayash and his Gaza Now media site was part of the event.
The funds that were raised by Gaza Now, they were being funneled to Hamas. And so, that case was really, as a result of understanding, the flows of money from, donors via a humanitarian organization that was supporting Hamas. And then, by portraying that evidence and showing that evidence, they can determine that, it was actually funding terrorism.
A case that showed the growing importance of cryptocurrency transactions for terrorist organizations, especially for raising funds.
Crypto is really useful for anyone in the world to transact with. I mean, it's a payment system that transcends borders. It's instantaneous. It's low cost. It's easily to port between different places. And so I think when you think about how terrorists use any technology, it has to be a technology that's easy to use and is available to anyone. And so in a similar way that terrorists use mobile phones and terrorists use traditional bank accounts and gift cards, they also use crypto in the same way.
But crypto can provide an opportunity for investigators too. Transactions carried out via crypto accounts or wallets can be traced relatively easily. In the case of Gaza Now, the payments are said to have added up to $4.5 million.
The nice thing that you have in crypto is that you have a real-time intelligence feed, right? It's one of the only truly open financial systems where intelligence services, police have real-time access to the transaction record. And so it is also possible to have detection mechanisms that you run in real time to look at changes in balances on specific accounts. And so potentially if this person was known to authorities beforehand, if there was some connection to a cryptocurrency wallet that was known, there is also the potential that you can find these indicators in advance of an attack rather than after the fact. And then after the fact, obviously, you can move very quickly through analyzing transactions in a matter of minutes rather than days waiting for banks to respond to subpoena requests or financial institutions in foreign jurisdictions to give you records. And so these investigations can move really quickly.
But as the methods and means used by investigators evolve, so do those of the people financing the organizations.
Say I want to raise funds online without using PayPal or other services because they have internal controls. I just ask for crypto. Bitcoin is yesterday's news. These days they use what are called privacy coins, like Zcash or Monero. Either the wallet or the blockchain or both are encrypted, making payments invisible to outsiders.
Which makes it increasingly difficult for investigators to prove if and how money reaches terrorist organizations. And in court, that proof is decisive. A German court will today announce the verdict for the man represented by Serkan Alkan and Martin Heising. The charge of forming a terrorist organization has already been dropped. But their client can still be convicted if prosecutors are able to prove that he sent money to ISIS. The key passage in the German Criminal Code is paragraph 129a, section 5. Any person supporting a proscribed organization shall be liable to a term of imprisonment of between 6 months and 10 years. Guilt here depends on the court being convinced that the money actually reached ISIS.
The evidence is extremely thin. It's unproven whether our client's brother is even a member of ISIS. For our client to be convicted, they have to prove that the money sent to Turkey reached ISIS, and that would require the brother to be in ISIS, and that wasn't proven. Plus, whether money in the camp went to an ISIS member cannot be proven either, which is why we hold that he be acquitted.
The German Justice Ministry wants to make things easier for investigators. Even an attempt to send money to a terrorist organization could become a crime. The ministry published a draft law in July 2025. It would also extend paragraph 89C of the Criminal Code, which covers the raising of funds for terrorism. The point is not whether the money actually arrives, but rather proving for what concrete purpose it was sent. The law lists acts such as committing murder, manslaughter, a war crime, bodily harm, abduction for the purpose of extortion, or hostage-taking.
This effectively means that when charging someone with funding terrorism, prosecutors have to connect each euro to a concrete criminal act, which would mean a level of stupidity you rarely see among these financiers. There was a case a few years ago, some idiot saying, "I'll send you 500 euros to kill the Iraqi Prime Minister while he's in Berlin." But he was very specific and actually was convicted of funding terrorism. But otherwise, terrorism financiers are very safe here in Germany.
Very few cases of terrorism funding actually go to trial. In 2018, the Federal Prosecution Office launched 57 investigations, with just 3 indictments. In 2019, 56 investigations and 5 indictments. And in 2020, 4 indictments from 41 investigations.
One useful step would be to do something similar to the US with its material support laws. There, it doesn't really matter what you're donating money for. You could contribute a piece of chewing gum to a group that's on our list of proscribed organizations. That would make you a terrorism financier, and you're looking at a minimum 10 years.
Contrary to the statements made by then Minister of the Interior Nancy Faeser, none of the men arrested in Düsseldorf were charged with funding terrorism. Although in the case of Side S, prosecutors believe they might secure a conviction for providing financial support for a terrorist organization, if they can prove that ISIS actually received the money.
I hereby announce the verdict.
How much money is being funneled from Germany to terrorist organizations? The Ministry of Justice says the ministry has no reliable statistical information on this. Terrorism financing obviously takes place in underground criminal networks, which limits the scope for investigation. But the ministry did have figures on money laundering linked to crowdfunding. Between 2020 and 2024, the total amount of money involved in those cases almost doubled, from around 1.3 to over 2.1 million euros. Those figures do not tell the full story, however, as they do not include the micro-donations that are unconnected to money laundering, such as via crowdfunding appeals on social media.
Of course, we need a better legal framework. You can never be good enough. In this arms race between prevention and terrorism funding, governments have to constantly evolve, because the other side adapts too. We are currently about 20 years behind. It would be nice if it were just 5.
Only 3 of the 7 defendants were found guilty by the court in Düsseldorf of providing financial support for a terrorist organization. What about Side S, the man represented by Martin Heising and Serkan Alkan? And what is your reaction?
The sentence was a little lower than I was expecting. They could have added more time. 4 years is acceptable, given the judicial panel's assessment. Could have been a bit less, too. We're hoping for a 2/3 release. With time already served, he'd have 11 months left, and I'm confident we'll get that.
The court ultimately found Side S guilty of being a member of a foreign terrorist organization and of having violated Germany's foreign trade laws. Chloe's husband is believed to have ended up in an ISIS prison in Syria without trial.
My husband was arrested by ISIS because he stopped working, as they called it, and didn't report to anyone. They were looking for him. There were patrols in the city, and he'd gone out with a friend to buy groceries and exchange money. He never came back.
For Chloe, an opportunity to escape. She contacted a smuggler after getting a SIM card in the city.
At first, you're really scared. Anyone could be pro-ISIS and betray you. But eventually, you're so worn down, you don't care anymore. You think, whether I get done in by a bomb or get shot by some jerk while escaping, no difference.
The smuggler texted to say he would pick her up during Friday prayers, when most people would be attending mosque.
I was kind of nervous, but at the same time, it's hard to explain. You're nervous, but also calm, because you have to function. There's no other option.
And the option worked. She made it out of Syria and eventually to Germany. Once back home, however, she got 2 years in jail for having joined ISIS.
There will always be people who send money out of sympathy or pity, even if they're actually against what's happening there. They find it unfair that people there are left on their own, that there are children starving or dying from disease. It's not right. And that opens the door for these support networks, for radicals.
Funding for Islamist groups continues to flow from Germany via both shadowy and less covert channels, groups that continue to pose a threat to Europe as well.